Welcome to the Self-Carapist Podcast. Join me, Lorraine Moorhead, a licensed psychotherapist, clinical supervisor, and EMDR consultant, along with expert guests as we explore the approaches and modalities we've used and developed to support our clients' success. Our conversations and stories are designed to inspire new and seasoned clinicians to stay curious, prioritize self-care, and never stop learning. Dr. Alissa Jerud is a mom of 2 kids, a licensed clinical psychologist, a clinical assistant professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and author of Emotion Savvy Parenting, a shame-free guide to navigating emotional storms and deepening connection. She has a PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Washington, where she received training from Dr. Marsha Linehan, might I add, and completed her postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Pennsylvania's Center for the Treatment and Study of Anxiety. Dr. Jerud also trains other clinicians in exposure-based treatments and frequently gives workshops in anxiety, stress, mental health, parenting, and social support to companies large and small. The audiobook of Emotion Savvy Parenting just launched, and today Dr. Jerud walks us through her ART framework, Accept, Regulate, and Tolerate, showing exactly how therapists can help parents manage their emotions in real time. We'll cover everything from grocery store meltdowns to sibling conflicts, plus the adapted DBT skills that make it all possible. Alissa, hi, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Lorraine.
We are going to talk a little bit about your background, and you have a new book. I want to hear all about that. So if you want to just explain the book and what inspired it and kind of give an overview.
Yeah, for sure. So my book is called Emotion Savvy Parenting. And I wanted to write a book for parents to help them better regulate or manage their emotions. It's something I'm really passionate about, helping people, whether they're parents or not, relate more skillfully to painful, unwanted emotions, because they're feelings we all have at times. And I discovered along the journey of my own life as a parent that, nowhere is it more needed, like skills for better managing our own unwanted emotions than in parenting. And so I really felt like I could offer parents science-informed tools and a perspective that could help them better relate to those unwanted emotions that show up from time to time in their homes.
I think that's a great description. I was lucky to have a chance to read the book, and I really enjoyed it. One thing I just have to say is I think you're a really great writer.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. One thing that you highlight in the book, and you do a good job of, is just explaining how even with your background and your training, it doesn't naturally always translate in every situation. Could you just explain any challenges you've noticed with managing those emotions, knowing that you are a psychologist with this great clinical background and still find yourself managing your emotions along with the emotions of your kids?
Yeah. I can say I struggled with this initially when I was a parent and I, wasn't showing up exactly as I wanted to with my kids. I was hard on myself, and felt like I was failing in some way. I should be able to do better because I know better. I have these tools. And along the way, I realized, though, that being hard on myself, one, wasn't helpful. We do our best when we actually feel good about ourselves. When we feel like badly about ourselves, it's hard to show up as we really want to. And so I realized that. I also realized that I'm human, and all of us, no matter our backgrounds or training, we're going to have trouble at times regulating our emotions. And I think about it just like, any professional, if they're really skilled at what they do, it doesn't matter how skilled they are, they're going to make mistakes from time to time. I just watched The Last Dance, the documentary about Michael Jordan.
Michael Jordan, yeah.
You see him miss shots sometimes, right? Some days he didn't score as many baskets as other days. And I think it's that same idea that, even with our, even if for parents who read my book, right? Or for listeners who are therapists who feel like they should be able to do this just right, it's just not going to happen. Sometimes we're going to mess up.
I think that's a great reminder. I've felt that way, and I know a lot of people who might be listening have felt that pressure that our kids should be behaving a certain way, that our reactions should come across a certain way. And of course, there's no such thing as perfect, even for those trained in child development. And you're so right that being frustrated with ourselves isn't going to lead to a more optimal reaction. And in fact, more often than not, it's going to lead to a less desirable reaction. So just trying to sort of balance those two pieces. What modalities influenced the book and the approach?
Yeah, so I specialize primarily in treating anxiety-related disorders. So obsessive compulsive disorder, PTSD,
Hmm.
social anxiety, specific phobias, all of those. And I use exposure therapy, but my approach is really informed by, an accepting lens, right? So I don't know how familiar you are with inhibitory learning, but it's a theory that explains how it is that exposure is effective. And the idea behind it primarily is just that what tends to enable exposures to be effective, to be helpful for people, is that over time they build these muscles for tolerating distress and uncertainty. It's not about trying to get rid of anxiety, make anxiety go away, but instead accepting that anxiety is this normal, natural emotion that we're all going to feel at times. And so again, it's about not how can we get rid of it when it shows up, but how can we help people relate more skillfully to it when it's there. So
Mhm.
that's on the kind of anxiety side of things. I also was fortunate enough to have worked with Dr. Marsha Linehan in graduate school.
Oh,
So
wow.
she was at the University of Washington where I did my doctorate. I was part of her DBT team. And so really learned DBT skills and therapy from her. And so I also do a good amount of emotion regulation coaching with people, like helping them to better relate to emotions across the board, not just anxiety. And then I do that with parents as well. So both of those modalities, both exposure therapy from this like inhibitory learning perspective where we're not trying to get rid of anxiety, but learning how to relate more skillfully to it. And then also DBT skills. Those also really informed the book overall.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Would you be able to maybe share an example of how inhibitory learning is used in the book, or how you might be able to walk a parent through it?
Oh, that is a great question. So I don't even think I mention inhibitory learning in the book at all, but more for a parent, let's say, who feels anxious about something. Maybe they're worried about their kids bringing germs home. Maybe they're
Mhm.
worried about their kids getting hurt, right? Getting harmed in some way on the playground or at a sleepover. What I'd want to help that parent with would not be to get rid of that anxiety, right? But instead to learn, oh, I can worry that my son's hands might be covered in germs when he chooses to put his hands all over my face and stick his fingers in his mouth. I can worry about that. I can feel anxious about that, accept that that might be the case and let him do that anyway, right? Because he's a 18-month-old and that's what, 18-month-olds do. Or I can accept for like my teen, right? I can feel anxious about them going out. Maybe they've recently gotten their license and I'm feeling anxious about my teenager driving, not knowing if they're going to be safe. I can feel anxious about that and still allow them to drive. Obviously, take reasonable precautions and, maybe you're not letting them drive at 3 a.m. And that sort of thing. But still doing what matters to you, what's important to you, learning that you can feel that anxiety and not have to do anything to try to reduce that anxiety or make it go away or avoid it altogether.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it feels like to me, maybe a piece of what makes that possible is that you're kind of keeping that anxiety in the present moment and
Mhm.
not projecting out to the worst case scenario today, tomorrow, and 15 years from now.
I will actually say when I'm working with somebody who struggles with anxiety of some kind, I actually will have them accept the possibility that those feared outcomes won't
Mm.
happen. And I want them to do that because I want to help them learn that they can approach that anxiety in full. They don't have to avoid in any way. So they can even like allow themselves to say out loud something really scary. That's something that they're terrified could happen, that it could in theory happen, because it could, right? Just about anything, as far as I'm concerned, could happen. And so we can just accept it as a possibility, just like I can accept that the light above me might come crashing over my head at any moment in time. I'm not worried about it, but in theory it could. And I can accept that, acknowledge that, say that, just like we can do with those feared outcomes. Well, then still choosing to focus our attention on the present moment, right? We can like give a nod, sure, that could happen, and I'm going to stay here right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. Radical acceptance. Whatever it is, I can accept it and go from there. In terms of emotion regulation that you mentioned with DBT, what are some of the pieces that can be important for parents to consider when it comes to that?
I'm going to say the most important thing would just be recognizing, well, two things. One, that all emotions serve a purpose, right? Like they are there because they're evolutionarily adaptive. We're not intended to try to get them to go away or suppress them in any way. That actually tends to backfire, doesn't serve us all that well. So that's the first piece to note. The second piece is that our emotions are much more complex than most of us realize. And we can use that complexity to our advantage, right? Because if you think about it, if there's, if you had like, I don't know, some kind of a machine and it only had like one thing that enabled it to work, like, I don't know, there was one part to it. If that part breaks, you're done, right? But if there were many little parts, there are many different points for intervention, right? I can tweak this one little part, I can tweak that little part, and then I can change what's going on. And the same is true with our emotions. So maybe there are certain components of an emotion that I can't change, but maybe there are others I can. And
Yeah.
that can help me to better manage that emotion that's there.
Yeah. In terms of your approach, how have you incorporated it with parents in your practice, or for clinicians listening? What do you think would be some key elements that they could take away?
I guess the big overarching theme of my book is that as parents, oftentimes what happens is our kids engage in behaviors that can be really frustrating and challenging for us to navigate, right? The behaviors themselves stir up some uncomfortable emotions in us. And as a result, because we're human, we're wired to want to avoid those uncomfortable emotions, to make them go away. So we oftentimes engage in behaviors that aren't all that effective for us, or that aren't maybe consistent with how we actually want to roll as parents or people. So we do something to try to get whatever is happening that's causing that emotion within us. We want to get that to stop. And so oftentimes we do something that, like, again, it's not ideal for us. And so I think that's just recognizing that as the first piece, and knowing that the only person we truly have full control over is ourselves. And so when we try to control our kids, maybe it works in a moment. Maybe I raise my voice, or I say, like, I demand that my kids stop doing something. I tell them there's going to be a punishment or a consequence if they don't. Might work in the moment, but at some point it's not going to work. My kid's not going to listen. They're going to run away with that thing you told them they couldn't take away. And we're going to feel some strong unwanted emotions in those moments, understandably so. And so it's about learning, okay, might there be a different way where no matter what my kid is doing, I can find a way to kind of act calmly, even if I'm feeling dysregulated inside, so that I don't make this situation worse. Because oftentimes our attempts to control our kid, again, end up backfiring. Our kids become more and more out of control, which renders us feeling even more, more out of control ourselves.
Yeah, I'm thinking of that dance around the CBT, thoughts, emotions, and behavior
Yeah.
triangle, that a kid has um, wants a candy bar in the checkout line at the grocery store. This is such an archaic example I still use because we grocery deliver now.
Yeah.
We're avoiding the checkout line. And then we say, no, I already told you not to ask about that. And then the kid either demands more fervently or gets upset, and then we're upset because they're upset. And so the behavior isn't extinguished because we took a hard line or got a little bit frustrated. In fact, we're kind of getting more of a reaction. If the goal was to avoid the shame of a tantrum in the line, well, now we've kind of perhaps exacerbated it beyond what it was going to be.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And again, right, you can tell your kid, no, we're not going to have a candy bar, but you can't control what they do from there, right? And so wouldn't it be helpful? My perspective when I'm working with parents is I want to help them learn how to manage in those moments, how to feel whatever emotions are there, not try to get rid of them, but again, relate more skillfully to them so that those emotions don't take over. They don't hijack their brain. And so I share with parents like a framework to help them do this. And these are tools that are really rooted in DBT skills, but they're tools for accepting, regulating, and tolerating emotions. I call them the ART tools for short, but they're tools we can bring into moments like that in the grocery store or other moments where we start to feel these uncomfortable emotions. How can we then show up in a way that isn't going to fan the flames of that dysregulation and make the moment harder for us and for our kids?
Yeah. And did you develop the art tools? Is
The
that
art
your?
tools, so yeah, so I mean, some of them you'll see are straight from DBT,
Yeah.
some, right, and some are DBT skills that I kind of tweaked. So there are certain skills that I renamed, that I came up with like a new acronym for, but really they're tools borrowed and adapted for parents from DBT. But the art tool, like that acronym itself, yes, I did come up with.
It seems like that's a big piece that you've woven throughout the book
Mm.
as well.
Yeah, exactly.
For the parent in the checkout line, could
Mhm.
you kind of answer that little scenario with art tools?
Yeah.
How you could reimagine the outcome of that scenario where now everybody's hot and sweaty and upset and in a rush and embarrassed, and how that could look different with the incorporation of the art tools?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I think it depends on the parent, which tool they're going to bring in,
Yeah.
and what is consistent with that parent's values in terms of how they're going to navigate a given situation. For me, what I would say if, and not if, but when my kids start to throw some kind of, they have an outburst in public, let's say, usually my first step is to notice what's happening, right? To like accept, yeah, they're really upset. They really want this candy bar.
Hmm.
And then, so that's the acceptance piece. Oftentimes in those moments, my heart starts racing. I start getting a little hot, a little sweaty. And so I notice like, ooh, I'm having a strong physiological response, right?
Hmm.
So one of the tools is the tolerate skills, right? And those are tools that you can use to help you when those strong emotions are there. You can't really do anything to change them. They're going to be there. How can you maybe take the edge off of those emotions a smidge, like cool them down a smidge so that, again, they don't take over, lead you to do something that you're going to regret? So then you could bring in a tolerate skill. In my book, I talk about a group of skills called the care skills. So maybe in that moment, I choose to just exhale slowly for a moment. I take a moment to take a normal breath in and a really slow breath out. Maybe I even do that for a few moments before I even choose to respond to my kid, because I know that that can help to reduce my heart rate a little bit so that I'm not so dysregulated. Maybe I try a skill that I call opposite action, which in DBT is grouped as or is considered an emotion regulation skill. Think of it as a distress tolerance skill, but it's basically doing the exact opposite of what my urges are pulling for me to do in that moment. So that moment in the grocery store, I may be tempted to say, stop it, right? Like you're embarrassing us. I may say like, well, we're not getting anything now. I want to walk out the store, right? I might have all those urges. I may have an urge to raise my voice, but can I do the opposite instead? Right? Maybe speak even softer than I usually would and just, wow, like acknowledge what I see. You really want that candy bar.
Hmm.
Ugh, it's hard. We're not going to get it. And you're allowed to scream as much as you want if that's something, right? Like maybe I don't want them screaming in the grocery store. So maybe instead I'm going to say, we'll check out and then you can tell me afterward just how upset you are that we're not getting that candy bar, right? So I could, again, different approaches depending on what's going on. And then if, maybe in that moment too, I notice like I'm having some thoughts about my kid, like, oh, they're so difficult. Why do they always have to make grocery store trips so hard? I'm having those kinds of thoughts. I might be able to reframe those thoughts to come up with an alternative thought that might be a little more adaptive, that might leave me feeling a little less frustrated with my kid. Or maybe I have the thought, oh, you know what? They're probably really struggling today in the store because they didn't have their nap today. And also, they never really ate lunch. Like, so maybe I need to make sure to, like, let me take one of the bananas from the bag and give it to them. That's probably going to help them feel a little bit better. So, or maybe I realize I haven't had that banana, or I haven't had that food. And so I go ahead and I grab something to eat to help me be able to better show up for them.
Even that noticing moment that you described where you're taking a deep breath and saying, wow, I noticed the physiological response. I'm getting a little sweaty. Even as you're quickly going through that assessment, it might have the effect, to your point, of bringing down the tension a little bit.
Yeah, potentially there's that expression, name it to tame it, right? Just like noticing, labeling what's going on in your body, being mindful of that can have that effect for sure. It may, depending on how intense the physiological response or the emotions are within you, it may not be enough, right? And that's where those distress tolerance skills come in. They can be really rapidly, like they can rapidly reduce arousal, be really effective for helping you to then show up in the way you want to. And then you can follow those up with additional skills to help you better manage in that moment.
Yeah, I loved the banana example too, and where you turned it inward, like, oh, I actually didn't eat either. So some of this tension that I'm attributing to this behavior is actually, again, a physiological piece. It takes the heat out a little bit when you're looking at the big picture like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it can help you feel more empowered too. Oh, like there might be something I can do here. And again, maybe it's not going to be a cure all. Maybe it's not going to make the moment all that much better, but maybe that's something a step I can take and we'll see and go from there. And if that doesn't help, okay, well, then what else can I do? And again, that's where the complexity of those emotions, I think, comes into play, that there are all those different points for intervention and we can keep trying until we kind of reset the system.
Yeah. There's that pressure to fix it in the moment, and it feels like there's almost a permission slip. Like, what if the goal here isn't to fix it? It's not maybe to have the quiet kid who's waiting politely in the cart.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I say this all the time when I'm working with a client or patient. I say that, like, I want to encourage them to view those really challenging, unwanted moments that, where they feel an intense emotional response to their kid. Their kid is doing something that, like, objectively might be challenging for most of us. I encourage them, though, to see those moments not as dreaded, terrible moments that should be avoided at all costs, but instead as golden opportunities to practice relating more skillfully to the feelings that boil up within them, right? And that's really hard to do. It's like a really tricky lens shift to take on. But the more we can do that, the more likely it is that we're going to be successful, because now this thing that's happening isn't a problem that I have to fix, right? It's instead, oh yeah, this is what happens sometime. And now this is a chance for me to shine, for me to, like, do what I've been trying to do, what I've been practicing doing better.
Yeah. All of the negative research that we've seen about stress, like heart issues, panic, different things like that, it might be linked to how we're thinking about stress. Yeah. And if we're thinking about stress like, this is killing me, this is too hard, then it is. And if we're thinking about it like, wow, I have this great rush of adrenaline, it's really gearing me up to show up, then it can be helpful. And I'm hearing some of that and like, wow, what a neat opportunity for me to relate to my child and understand where they're coming from and really notice how this process is unfolding, rather than I'm the parent and I have to fix it, can really gear us up to get a nice boost of adrenaline, maybe to step in the role that we want to, or in the light that we want to.
Yes, for sure. You're spot on there. And I think another thing to think about is that those tough moments are going to be there time and time and time again. And the only way we can really prepare for them is if we train for them, right? It's like kind of, that's why athletes train extra hard in practice so that they're ready for those really challenging games or races or whatever it may be. And the same idea as parents, right? If everything was only ever smooth sailing, day in and day out, well, then when an inevitable explosion were to occur, we'd be completely blindsided, right? And like not know how to deal with that. But if instead we're having these hiccups, day in and day out or every few days or whatever it may be, those are critical moments where we get to choose how we're going to respond, right? Are we going to choose to let the emotions we're feeling overtake us? Or are we going to use skills so that those emotions can be there and we can still choose to act in a way that's consistent with how we want to show up for our kids?
Have you explained these approaches to older generations of parents, and how have they understood it?
Interesting question. So yes, I have, right? I gave a talk about this to grandparents actually.
Oh,
And it was
neat.
interesting to see the reception. And I don't know that it's so generational as much as we may think because, but you're right. Like, I think this idea of welcoming unwanted emotions, accepting them, not doing anything to try to fix them, is not exactly what grandparents probably grew up with. That's probably not how they raised their kids. It's not how I was raised in my own home. And so you're right. I think this is a bit of a novel idea in many cases, but even for parents of who are in their 20s or their 30s, I think these ideas are still pretty radical, right? Like the idea of not trying to fix emotions. Because if you think about it, that's what we were all taught. Like I always say from day one, most babies here, it's almost like a parent's attempt to make distress go away for the kid, which comes from this very loving, well-intentioned place. And I'm not saying that I think that as babies on day one, we're picking up that those emotions are to be avoided. But I think it does, those kinds of messages sent, or those kinds of behaviors, that way of relating to those strong emotions, send the message that maybe those should be avoided or reduced in some way. So I guess I will say I'm not sure it's just older individuals who struggle to embrace these ideas.
Yeah, I loved how you phrased that as radical. We're revolutionizing things here. I met family decades ago, and it was multiple older generations that were
Mhm.
parenting the kid. And I will always remember something a great great grandma said. She said, in my day, the kids listened because we said so. And now we're empowering them to want to imagine what it would be like to go with our instruction. But you're right. I mean, parents may be seeing their child's emotional reaction as partly their responsibility to manage. It
Mhm.
has been woven throughout the tapestry of many of our upbringings.
Yeah. Yeah. And you think about it, like, I wish this weren't the case, but you see, I think, especially, but I can say before I became a parent, if I saw a kid having a meltdown in the grocery store, I would have thought, oh, like, what's that parent not doing that they should be doing? So it makes sense that parents might jump to that conclusion that, like, this is my job. It's on me to help my kid feel better, to make sure that they're not ruffling the waters here in some way. And it's a hard shift to take on, right? And I will say, like, even though I fully believe that we're better off as parents and our kids are better off if we kind of let go of that can attempt to control their emotions and even the attempt to control our own emotions, I struggle with it at times. It's not an easy position to take. And when we can, I think it can be really freeing and really empowering.
I'm reminded of a message in the book about partners as well, and how this is a great mindset to integrate not just with our kids, but with our partners.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's easier said than done, right? I get a lot of questions around what do I do if I really buy into these ideas, but my partner doesn't? I can't just spoon feed them this idea and expect that they're going to take it all in and then they're going to change overnight. Like, that's probably not going to happen. And I think just like we can't change our kids, we can't get our partners to change. Instead, probably our most effective way is if we prioritize the relationship, right? Prioritize that relationship, talking, like modeling what we want to see essentially, and sharing these ideas in a way that is respectful and kind, that's not shaming in any way. And that's when our words are probably going to be most likely to land. And knowing that we're probably going to need to keep revisiting, like having the conversation again and again and again. And if a partner is really, on board, wants to try to take in these ideas and embrace them, but is struggling to do so, might be that they could benefit from additional help, whether that's in the form of therapy or podcasts like this one, reading my book, right? That sort of thing to help give them a little bit more assistance in trying to take on this very new way of viewing emotions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the elements of DBT that I really like and find myself incorporating a lot is the chain analysis.
Mhm.
Can you explain what that is and how you've incorporated it into your work here?
Yeah, yeah. So a chain and solution analysis is essentially kind of two sets of skills that we can use when there's some sort of a problematic behavior that's occurred. So I frame this not as a problematic behavior that your kid has engaged in, but something that you've done. You've
Yeah.
raised your voice. You've, threatened to take away screens forever. You've done something and afterward you're like, oh, that just didn't feel good. And that's not really how I want to talk to the people I love most in this world, right? So I want to try to change that. I want to do better. Well, then it's kind of really looking back at what exactly happened that led to that problematic behavior. So what happened right before? And then like all the links in the chain, essentially, that led to the problematic behavior. And then that even came afterward. And then when we do that, when we examine all of those links, that's when we can bring in a solution analysis where we can brainstorm, okay, like what could I do here that would have, let's say this vulnerability factor of me not getting enough sleep last night is partly likely, that was one of the links in the chain that led me to lose my cool. Well, maybe I need to actually start prioritizing my sleep a little more, which I realize isn't possible for everyone.
Sure.
But that's one thing I could do. Or maybe I realized that, there was something else going on. Maybe I had just had a fight with my partner and that also left me feeling a little on edge. Okay, well, maybe then I need to work a little bit on that relationship again. So it may be that, and that might be for those sorts of things, the things that came beforehand. Then maybe I could think about like, what are the links in the chain of events that occurred where I could intervene? And so when I talk about the chain, I'm realizing I've kind of glossed over this a little bit, but we're really getting into the nitty gritty, like each little thing that happened. So my kid said this. I noticed my heart started racing, right? Then my kid started screaming that very same thing. Whoa. I had the thought, how can they do this? Like, this isn't right. I need to get this to stop. I then felt really hot in my body. Then my kid started, they slammed their door and said, I hate you. I'm never talking to you again. And then what happened next, right? Like, so it's kind of like looking at the blow by blow analysis of what happened and then thinking about, okay, that first moment I noticed my heart racing. What could I have done there that might have helped me?
Hmm.
What could I have done when I had the thought that I've got to make this stop? Could I have reframed that thought so that maybe I would have then taken a more skillful approach?
Such an important and helpful distinction that you've framed it. We're not to the child's behavior. We're really able to take ownership of our emotions and look to the beginning to better scaffold the parent's self to navigate that emotion in the future.
Yeah, it's kind of like an athlete, right? A baseball player, they may go back and look at their swing. What did I do wrong there that led me to strike out? So that the next time around, they can fine tune it. And it's the same idea. That's what we're doing with the chain analysis. I'm realizing I should probably note that, like, I'm not saying that we should never try to change our kids' behaviors in any way,
Yeah.
right? Like if our kid is causing harm to somebody, maybe they're destroying something or they're saying something really hurtful. I'm not saying you can't intervene, but I'd say intervene as little as possible in the moment and then think about your time to intervene being after the fact, right?
Yeah.
Like when the emotions have cooled down and because they're probably not going to be able to take in any of what you're saying in the heat of the moment.
Yeah, that's a great point that some kids are even self-aware enough to say, I don't like public correction, or we're able to pick up on it.
Yeah.
And so to have a conversation about it over a snack the next day, like, hey, what could we have done here? It might really be an opportunity to build.
Yeah. Recently, my daughter got really mad at me about something. And it was like, we had a car ride and it was just like everything I said, she was really upset with, she was not happy with. And afterward, she came up to me probably like half an hour later and she was like, I'm really sorry. Like, I'm sorry I was so hard on you in the car.
Mm.
And I forget her reason, but she was so aware that it was like, that she had had a headache and that like something tough had happened at school. And she like said that. And I realized it's probably in large part because of all the times when I've come up to her and said, I'm so sorry I raised my voice there. Like I was rushing and felt stressed about needing to get out on time. And you didn't deserve to be talked to in that way. From times of me doing that chain analysis in my head and then like sharing what I've discovered, she started to do that process herself, which is
Oh,
kind of cool to see.
that must have been such a special moment. I think that's a great point that while focus for that isn't necessarily on the child's behavior, they're inadvertently learning skills by that narration process that you've gone through. You've narrated your internal process. Wow, I really realized I was rushing. I didn't leave myself quite enough time in the morning, and I could tell I felt really nervous about it, which led to some frustration. You're really narrating this internal process that you've gone through in a way that we might not naturally do. And your child is able to pick up on how to do that internal process because of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of neat when you get to see that
Oh,
unfold.
yeah. You sort of maybe distinguish between if it's a sibling and if it's a kid at the park. Can you talk about that a little bit and how to think about scenarios like that differently?
Yeah. I mean, my overarching thought first is that siblings have to coexist. They have no choice but to live with each other. So we can't always, I mean, sure, you could, anytime there's a conflict, separate them immediately. But that's a lot of work. And that's probably not that realistic. And they're going to have to learn how to navigate that dynamic, that relationship. But if my kid is picking on a kid on the playground, there is no reason my kid has to stay at that playground, right? That kid who my kid is picking on has to continue to get picked on. I can move my kid. I can say, oh, you know what? Looks like it's time for us to go because I can't let you talk in that way to that kid. And with siblings, again, I can't remove my kid always from the situation. I can't, if we're driving on an 8-hour car ride, I can't say like, oh, you're going to have to walk the rest of the way, right? So, it's about learning in that moment to accept, yes, sometimes my kids are going to say hurtful things to each other. Sometimes they're even going to physically hurt each other. And when that happens, if that happens, I'm going to get in there as quickly as I can to stop any additional harm. And we're certainly going to circle back later after the fact, just, whoa, what happened there, right? Like you were really mad at your sister and like, I hit her really hard. What was going on? I wonder what could I have done that to support you better in that moment so that, she didn't get hurt. So again, you can have those conversations after the fact, stop things when they happen, but also accept that sometimes it's probably going to happen. I've seen siblings are going to shove each other. They're going to say hurtful things. They're going to take each other's toys. They're going to mess up, something that's important to them. That's going to happen. Accepting that and then helping them do better in the future.
Can you give some possibilities of ways that this scenario could be handled when your child hurts someone that you don't know or someone that's not in the family?
Yeah. So, I guess it probably depends on the age of the kid and how badly that other kid was hurt. But my first thing would always be just to go to the kid who's been hurt. Like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Unless I need to like physically move my kid away so that no additional harm comes. But I would go to that kid. Wow. Like, I'm so sorry. What can I do to help? And just kind of validate whatever they're sharing. Maybe they don't need much of anything, but maybe they do. Maybe they need an ice pack. Okay, I'm going to go get ice or I'm going to get somebody else to get them ice. And then I'm going to apologize for my kid. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so there may be some kids who come in immediately and say, I'm sorry on their own. But let's say it happened, I don't know, they were on the soccer field playing and one of them was upset that they were losing. And so your kid then was upset they were losing. So they started pushing the kid who just stole the ball from them. And the kid got hurt, fell down. And your kid's still angry that like this kid is beating them. They don't feel like it's fair. And so I'm not going to demand that my kid apologize in that moment, right? I'm going to apologize for them. And because that apology otherwise probably isn't going to be all that genuine. And We can all tell that when an apology is given and it's not really truly felt, or the person doesn't really mean what they're saying, and it doesn't mean much to us in those moments. So that's what I would do if something like that were to happen. Help the kid who's hurt. Apologize for my kid if they're not doing so themselves. If I need to separate my kid, and also I check in with them. Wow, like, what's going on there, right? You seem really upset, so upset that you even shoved him on the soccer field. Like, tell me about that. What was happening? And what should we do now? Would it be helpful to go home to grab a snack? Like, what do you think you need? So you could also, again, depending on how dysregulated your kid is, you could have that problem-solving conversation. Maybe, though, in some moments, you just have to make that decision for your kid. I think it's time for us to head home.
I think that is a great way of sort of marking and intervening that the behavior wasn't right, just so the other child hears that, while
Yeah.
also not expecting something in the moment that's unrealistic from your child. Like demanding an apology could lead to more unpleasant dialogue between the two if your child isn't ready to think through that chain analysis for themselves, really.
This, I think, is another idea that is really hard for a lot of parents to swallow.
Yeah.
So foreign, and it can feel uncomfortable as parents to like see our kid do something and then not demand that our kid apologize, right? It like feels like we're not doing our job. But I share this in the book. I have just seen it pay off not doing this. Like, I have never once forced my kids to give an apology, and they are almost always the first to apologize when something goes down, and like give really genuine apologies. They write each other handwritten notes and like offer to do something to repair. Like, I'm gonna like make you something just as a way to say I'm sorry, and they do that not because I've demanded that they do it, but just because they genuinely feel bad afterward and they want to try to correct what happened. And so, like, some parents, I think, worry that if they don't force that apology, their kid isn't going to learn to give it. I don't think that's the case at all. If we model giving apologies, we give those apologies for our kids when they're not yet able to do so, those apologies will eventually flow and follow naturally.
You're right that some people might hear, I apologize for my kid, and feel like you're kind of cleaning up for them, but it feels like you're kind of holding two things at the same time. I can recognize that that child got hurt, and I want to allow that child to know that outcome wasn't helpful, and also notice that my child in that moment might not be ready to give the apology, and we're not going to be here together any longer. So if it's not given now, it won't be.
Right. You can give it for them, knowing that one of these days your kid will be able to give that apology. Maybe not to that kid, but
Yeah.
other kids who they've harmed in some way. Because we're humans again. We're going to hurt people's feelings, or we're going to accidentally cause physical harm at some point in time. And my hope is that down the road, my kids, other people's kids who I work with, will be able to just give that from a place not of shame or feeling obligated to do that, but just more because that's genuinely what they want to do in that moment. They want to issue that apology.
Yeah, it feels like that authentic awareness of your own emotions is then also serving in the modeling. Do you have any other suggestions on how clinicians listening could incorporate this book?
Yeah, there's the overarching theme, right, that I talked about of focusing on helping parents control themselves as opposed to their kids. And then I think it's really learning the skills. And so I selected, because DBT, for those therapists who aren't trained in DBT, like, it's a lot to try to learn all of the DBT skills. So I basically said, okay, here are the skills that I, in my clinical practice, in my own personal life, have found most helpful,
Yeah.
both just as being a human and also when with my kids. And so I tried to bring those into the book. There's actually not that many. And so for therapists who are wanting to, help parents, I would say learning these skills so that you can teach parents these skills. There's accept, regulate, and tolerate. Within each letter, there are a number of mini skills that you can use to help you accept, to help you regulate, to help you tolerate. And it would just be about introducing those skills and then helping parents practice them when they're with their kids, right? Obviously, you're not going to be there when a parent is in the moment with a kid necessarily, but after the fact, you could talk about, what skill could you have used there? And you can encourage the parents to practice a given skill within the week and then report back. How did that go? Right. And maybe like troubleshoot where it didn't work so well and what maybe led to that not going the way the parent wanted. What could they do next time? Do they need to add in additional skills? If so, then you could teach those skills. I think that's the biggest thing, learning those skills to be able to share them.
I think that's a really neat idea. And you're right. I think it is so cool to hear people whose practicums have included DBT because it is so involved.
Hmm.
It is such a great process for folks to learn. But I love the idea of it being kind of synthesized to a base of important ones that could be fruitful to start with. And I think it's so neat when someone is recommending a book to a family to also be able to help share how to incorporate it and have someone to be a sounding board to talk through situations
Right.
under that lens.
Yep. Maybe even to practice the skill in the therapy room. There's
Mm-hmm.
one in there that I talk about called the care skills. It's a really fun one. So it's essentially for those who know DBT, they're the tip skills. I just transform them. I use a different acronym, CARE. And it's like one of the coolest skills to do with somebody because you can see someone's heart rate reduced by 50% or more within 30 seconds, right? So I have a heart rate monitor in my office and I'm no longer seeing people in person, but I used to. And I've also done this at I've given, workshops before where I've brought the heart rate monitor with me and had volunteers come up on stage and, we get their heart rate up. I have them run in place and then they use one of the care skills. Oftentimes ice, cool with ice is one that I really, really like that works really quickly. So they'll use that and we put on the heart rate monitor and we see that heart rate just plummet in a way that it can't do on its own. And so that's just one example where, you can actually practice it in the room and the person can see like, oh my gosh, that's wild. That worked so well, so quickly. And then that can empower them to say, I'm going to try this the next time I start to feel heated with my kids.
Hmm. That's a great technique. Why don't you tell us about the regulate skills?
Yeah. So those are skills for really just understanding what an emotion is, what our emotions are in the first place.
Mm.
Because we can't, I talk about this when I talk about acceptance, but we can't change something unless we first accept and understand it, right? So how can I understand my emotions so that I might be able to change them when they arise and aren't serving me well? And so that I might even be able to make myself less vulnerable to experiencing those unwanted emotions in the first place. So first, it's just kind of like understanding, as we talked about, the many different components that make up each and every one of our emotions. And within the regulate skills, there are really three main skills that I introduce in the book to help parents regulate their emotions that target three of those components or ingredients of an emotion. And so those are some skills that can be helpful. So there's both problem solving, the prompting event, because in order for an emotion to fire, there has to be some sort of a prompting event that occurs, right? So your kid does something, they say something that brings about a response in you. So there's that prompting event. So we can do things sometimes to change the prompting event. There are oftentimes then in response to the prompting event, some unhelpful interpretations that we end up having about what just happened, right? So we have the thought like this, I can't take this another second. My kid is, being so difficult. They're a jerk. We're having these unhelpful thoughts. And then there are also vulnerability factors that make it more likely that we're going to have those unhelpful thoughts. So again, we talked about like some of the, potentially more recent vulnerability factors, like I didn't get enough sleep, or I'm hungry, or I just had a fight with my partner. I'm stressed. I've got a lot going on at work. There can also be more distant vulnerability factors, things that happened a long time ago. Maybe as a kid, I was punished whenever I did or said what my kid is doing now. So there are those distant vulnerability factors too. And we can think about then the emotion regulation skills as being skills that can help us to tweak the prompting event or change the prompting event, those unhelpful thoughts, or those vulnerability factors. And again, if we just shake up one of those things, we change one of them, oftentimes we can bring about a different emotion in us or prevent that unwanted emotion from firing, from showing up in the first place.
Oh, so helpful to kind of look at the big picture in that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then just in closing, are there any techniques, and you might even have some to pull from this process, that you use for self-care or that you find yourself recommending to clients that you're serving for self-care?
I think for self-care, it's about doing what fuels you, right? Like
Hmm.
what helps you feel good. And so for me, I really thrive on walks outside, ideally like in the woods, so hikes of some kind. And I like to use the elliptical while watching whatever show I'm into at the moment in time and doing yoga. Those are three things that really do help to fuel me, and getting enough sleep and also nourishing my body like at a regular cadence. I never skip a meal. I always eat snacks. Those sorts of things are really helpful for me. But I think it's
Yeah.
about, for each person, what are the things that help you to feel energized, that help to boost your mood, that help you just be, show up as your best self. And it's finding what those are that really bring you joy, that bring you a sense of meaning and purpose, and trying carving out time to like infuse those activities into your day, even when it might be challenging, right? Maybe you can't always do it, but are there little pockets of time that you could take advantage of? If movement, for instance, feels good, you don't have to have a full 30 minutes necessarily. Like maybe you just go on a 5-minute walk in between meetings. Or you stretch a little bit in your seat at your desk while you're reading, catching up on email. But just making those little adjustments wherever possible can be really helpful.
I love that. I feel like it links so nicely to the chain analysis conversation too, that as folks might be exploring more about, well, what led to that feeling? What led to that body sensation? Why did I respond in that way when sometimes I don't? You might really be able to land on some of the things that you find yourself incorporating, like, I'm not going to get low blood sugar. I'm going to eat and snack regularly, because that's one of the things that for me might help to
Yeah.
reduce some of those responses that I'd like to see less of.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. What a great answer. And thank you so much for sharing a little bit of insight on your book, and congratulations on the release.
Oh, thank you so much. It was so fun getting to talk with you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Self-Carapist podcast. If you did, please subscribe and feel free to leave a review. You can also follow along at The Self-Carapist on Instagram, or head to lorrainemoorhead.com/podcast to grab a free copy of your own Learning Map worksheet to help track all of the tools and strategies you're interested in learning more about. See you next Wednesday.